few more just joining us now. So while we're waiting, and I'm always a fan of stealing a bit of time if you can. Let's, for a bit of fun, stick up a team working bingo. So have a look at this. And those of you who don't know how to play bingo, what we're trying to do is see if you can complete 4 boxes in a row. So can you answer yes to these questions enough to get a bingo line?
I'll need a dictionary. What's tertiary?
Just a university or first tier.
That's why I don't know what it is.
Somebody taught me that word one day, so I always take the chance to use it.
I think I'd go down. I think I've got a line.
Oh,
I don't know.
Okay.
Has delivered training in more than 10 different countries. Does that have to be virtually or face-to-face?
Absolutely, any way you want.
Well, there you go then. I'll do that one.
Okay. So what's your 4, Rosemary?
Has delivered an online team building event, is part of a team with my wonderful colleague Robert here, in a socially distanced in-person training event. Yeah, that was really successful. And has delivered training in more than 10 countries. Yes, definitely.
And Celeste, thank you, Rosemary. Celeste, did you have a bingo line too?
Yeah, I have 2, in fact.
Okay.
Yeah, the same as Rosemary. And the other one is part of a team, holds a professional trainer's qualification. Well, currently has at least 2 jobs. I'm assuming these as different projects. Okay. I don't know, consultancy and facilitation.
We can stretch that.
I still need to deliver another training session in 2021.
Okay, good to hear. So let me throw up another one, which is just a little bit of different. So that's a bit of about professional background. This is a bit more fun. Anyone got a bingo line on this one?
Oh, this is harder.
I can't believe there's anyone that hasn't bought from Amazon. Oh gosh. It's very hard.
Definitely not.
Anyone got any of them?
Well, I can try one. A diagonal here.
Go for it, Celeste.
So has played a musical instrument. Yeah, I still play. I play drums.
Okay, good.
Speaks 3 or more languages. I do Portuguese, Spanish, French, English.
Very good.
Well, I have 3 siblings, not more than. We are 4.
Okay.
And yes, I've appeared on TV and radio as well. So I'm a show person. Yeah.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Well, I
tend not to get lines for some reason. I get like 3 out of 4 or 2 out of 3 in a line.
Yeah. When I did this, I didn't have many, but I have won a lottery prize. 2 weeks ago, I got an email saying I'd won the Euro Millions lottery. But as you can tell, because I'm on here, it wasn't the full prize. I think it was £1.50. So technically it counts as a lottery prize.
Definitely.
Good. Okay, so we have a few people arrived already. We're just at 4:03. So I do have quite a lot to cover. So I'm going to start to plow on. As I mentioned, for those who didn't join at the start, we are recording this because a lot of people do register, I think, with the intention of watching later. And for some others who may want to leave earlier, we'll have the whole thing recorded. So I'm going to kick off. First of all, welcome to everyone, and thank you for joining me this afternoon, as it is here in a Scotland that's getting dark already. I was saying we've got a major storm coming in, but it's one of the good things about working indoors at home that after I leave this today, I'm not going anywhere for the rest of the evening. So what we're going to cover today is And this did seem to strike a note. We've done quite a lot of these kind of webinars that are just focused on a single product, but when we introduced this idea of, you know, socially distanced team working, it seemed to strike a chord with a lot of people. So we're going to have a little look at that. We're going to then look at a teamwork model to reference against, and I'll explain why we're doing that as we go through it. The majority of the time we'll be looking at some individual activities, how they work from a trainee and facilitator point of view, but I always like to put them in context. So that's why we're doing that. And I think I'm going to touch on probably about 11 different activities if we can get through them all today. And then lastly, if we've got a bit of time at the end, happy to take questions. What I would say is, you can see my colleague Kim is joining us. I'm going to try and work the slides and do a bit of talking. If you've got questions as you go through it, just fire those questions off to Kim. She'll interrupt me if it's important. If she can answer you directly, she will. And if we can't do either of those things, then we'll follow up at a later date. So does that sound good for everyone?
Yep.
We may get a bit of feedback, so if you need to switch off your mic, please do so. And if you want to switch it on to interrupt me if it's really important, that's also perfectly fine. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to ask is what is your definition? So this term, certainly in the UK, we hear it a lot, socially distance. What does socially distance mean to you? Just put an explanation of what you think that means to you in the chat box, and we'll start with that. Okay, Rosemary's got a number on it. Okay, Sharon, okay, working where you are, not in the same location, interesting. Robert, not in the same room. Rosemary's got 2 meters. Nick, different physical location. James, 1 meter to miles. Yeah, absolutely, James. She's socialized with people and it must be at a distance, okay, yeah. Okay, not physically meeting, physically distance, virtual, unable to interact socially as we'd like, yeah. I think I'm with you on that, Elizabeth. Okay, so that I find that really interesting, because again, when we start with this phrase that we think everyone's got the same definition of, often it's a little bit different. So one of the things that strikes me is that when we come to doing in-person events or face-to-face events, you know, all of these learners are going to have these definitions in their mind, especially if they don't know you, especially if they're coming along for the first time. So one of the things maybe to consider is to offer learners the chance to decide this. So one simple way of doing this, most people coming along to kind of open in-person events will have tent names or name badges. So you could consider providing some coloured stickers with them. So you could have a little definition that says, I'll put a green sticker on my name badge. That means I'm actually okay with physical distancing. I'll even come and shake hands with you. I'm not too concerned about it. If I stick a yellow sticker for everyone to see in my name badge, it means, yeah, I'm okay with the arrangements, but you know, I prefer we do the elbow touching and the air high-fiving rather than have the physical contact. And if I'm putting red on it, it may mean, look, I really want to keep my minimum 1 or even 2 meter distance from others. And whether you're a consultant working with a group or it's an open program, it could be really useful right at the start of this program to have a sense of what people mean by socially distanced, because you might have set some things up that this starts to change it. And our whole approach in terms of learning and experiential learning is really to put as much control in the hands of the learners as possible. So I think it's an interesting way perhaps to look at even in-person events, because I don't think there's much doubt that in-person events today are quite different than they were maybe a couple of years ago. So let me give you kind of our definition in terms of what we're going to look at today. The first thing is completely virtual. So the most distance, it might mean, James, you know, a meter to a mile. So no one is in the same room. We're all kind of the way we are just now. So it's a completely virtual activity. Hybrid is when we may have some people here in person in the room in the area, but some remote. And interestingly, speaking to clients, some are offering that as a kind of training methodology by choice. So we're going to hold this event. You can come along in person or you can join us by remoting in. And clearly that does give you some headaches as a facilitator and some challenges in terms of what you want to deliver. And then the most obvious is in person, people in the same space, but with some kind of infection control in place. And by that, I mean, it could be mask wearing, it could be the physical distancing, and it's probably at least a minimal exchange of communal objects, as we call them. So in the experiential learning world, we tend to deal with, with lots of materials. So everything I'm talking about today in terms of RSVP, physical objects, are laminated sheets you can disinfect, components that you can have prepared so that one group is using them or one person at a time, and you can kind of meet all of the infection control, hopefully, that your client or your group needs to work with. So when we talk about activities as we go through, we're going to be looking at these three ways of dealing with them. So the other thing that I think needs a bit of explanation is what do we mean by team building? What do we mean by team development objectives? It's a kind of a stock phrase, but it can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. In terms of what clients ask us for and what clients come and talk to us about in terms of tools can range from, well, we're going to get a group of people. Basically, we just want to have fun and get to know colleagues better. At this time of year, there's a lot of interest in that around the whole kind of virtual and physical Christmas party idea, I guess. It could be, let's provide some opportunities for the people to work together on tasks that interest and motivate them. Maybe it's going a stage further. We really want to model some important behaviors or build some skills. So we're really focusing on that as part of the session. Or it could be as far as actually trying to replicate the working situation where particular functional or project teams work together on different tasks and maybe come together and go apart. And then, something that's always a challenge within teams, how do we explore both individual and collective dynamics around key issues, power, authority, roles, values, competition, trust, all of the things that can make or break good teams and good team development. So all of those objectives, I guess, could be covered in different ways and all relate to some aspect of team building and team development. Again, just in terms of putting kind of our cards on the table on why we would use structured activities and experiential learning, here's where we come from a kind of design methodology point of view. I guess the first thing is to sensitize the group to issues that are important. So often in experiential learning, often in team development programs, it's about raising awareness and getting people to tune into things that are important. And sometimes that's not necessarily all shared. So this idea of getting a shared meaning can be important. Secondly, we hope to provide a safe environment for experimentation. I don't want to start a whole discussion about learning in the flow of work, but my colleague Jeff just wrote a blog about that, about how difficult it is to get people to change behaviors if you don't give them a safe environment. And I would argue that, in the workplace with your colleagues is not really the safest environment often for experimentation. Exploring existing patterns of thought and behavior, increasing self-awareness. Sometimes people aren't aware of the impact that they're having in team members, and using structured activities can help to bring that out. Or it could be about strengthening and reinforcing successful patterns. Cognitives in terms of what we think, motor in terms of what we do, and affective in terms of how we feel and our emotions. And then this idea, which people often come to us when clients ask us about how many groups do this activity well, or the structured activity, is it easy to do? If often you're being presented with unsuccessful or unsatisfying patterns of behavior in teams, then it's likely that those are going to be a challenge, and having structured activities which are challenging is actually quite useful. And then finally, this idea of experimentation. But once you've decided on a new approach that might work, where do you have the opportunity to try it out? A structured activity could be a low risk, and after all, it is a simulated world where making mistakes aren't too catastrophic. So that's the kind of reasoning and the thought process behind the kind of tools that we create and where we would look to use them within team development programs. Okay, so a fair bit of background, just trying to set the scene in terms of what we're doing, and what about team working models to reference against. Again, if you wouldn't mind, stick in for me in the chat, what are the types of models that you're working with when considering how to improve teamwork and team building? Are you based on particular theories, your own research? What's driving how you design teamwork and team building? So any models? Lencioni, okay, I'm not sure if that's how to pronounce it. That's the 5 dysfunctional teams, I think it is, yeah, social styles. Okay, Robert has his own model. Might ask you about that, Robert. The rocket model, yep, I've heard of that. Conscious communication, Nick, thank you. Yep, Jeff, there are lots of models out there, absolutely lots and lots. Okay, good. Some I haven't heard of that I will go and explore. James has his own model too. Hope you're not going to keep that a secret, James. And insights, I presume that means insights in terms of the psychometric. Great, thank you, Simon. Okay, thank you very much for those suggestions. So again, there are lots out there, but what I thought I would do in terms of coming back is something relatively simple that most people are probably aware of. It's been around for a long time. The Tuckman model typically looks at teams and the types of stages that you go through. So I'm going to try and relate some activities to this model. Again, most of these models you can usually relate to particular behaviors or areas, in which case you could select your own, but I just happened to pick this out. So again, forming is, the start, young teams, often people are independent. Often they're in their best behavior. I often find this when I haven't done it for a while, but when we do our physical sessions and we have a group of trainers in and you have them work with the activities for the first time, they're very, very polite to each other, and there tends to be very little in the way of conflict. Moving on to storming, where the group's sorting itself out, getting a bit more trust, opinions start to rise. Norming, often when people are kind of, I think the description I looked at was tolerating the whims and fancies of other members, which I quite like. But clearly a danger at that point. They're so focused on preventing conflict or stable that they don't think about pushing themselves to this final stage of performing and becoming high-performing teams. And again, as we know, groups will go through all of those stages, don't need to go through them in order, and often revert back. But I certainly find sometimes when talking to clients, this is a nice simple model to talk about in terms of where the team might be at if you were to describe them in general. One other thing I just wanted to look at in terms of our process. So once we've got to that stage, we know the kind of environment of the theatre, are we online, are we in place, the types of models that the client is interested in looking at. And the next thing, I think, particularly within team development, is ideally you've got to know what you're trying to achieve at an individual level. I mean, teams are not a coherent thing. They're full of individuals. So knowing what individuals are ideally interested in and where they're at is useful if you can get it. And the second is, what is it we're actually trying to achieve in terms of this behavior? What is it you would like people to see from those who have been involved in your team development when they go back to the office or back into the workplace? And certainly in our experience, and I think in everyone's, behavioural change often needs this idea of illumination. So what's happening just now, a chance to rehearse and practice, and certainly requires commitment and motivation. As a facilitator or trainer or learning designer, you can't pour behavioural change into people. They need to be committed and motivated to be able to do it. And then the final thing I would say that comes from our design process is they need this context for learning. They need to know why they're there, and they need to be sufficiently challenged. So when choosing activities or designing activities, they can't be too simplistic. There has to be that degree of challenge to get them engaged. So hopefully all of that seems useful to you. So I'm going to take a look at the first area. So we were asked to work with a team who's probably at the kind of forming stage, kind of early team intervention. We'd maybe be looking at possibly shorter, varied activities that build on the themes, getting people to work together cooperatively. Maybe consider including some possibility for conflict if you're wanting to move them forward. And the first activity I want to talk about briefly is workstations. Again, I know some people know of this activity. In this case, some of you again will be aware that we launched the online version of workstations from our platform. So this is developed based on physical activity. So it's a team problem solving game, messages around team communication, where the teams need to put a process in place and manage those individual contributions. It's run, and just check, am I sharing? You can see the experiential learning tools background on the screen just now?
Yes,
we can. Good. So I'm just going to spend a couple of minutes just explaining this. So we decided last October to launch our own platform for delivering experiential learning tools, because we felt that there really wasn't anything out there, and we wanted to give both facilitators a little bit of flexibility, but also create digital versions of lots of our activities. So this is the way that workstations is delivered. So instead of in the physical version handing out a series of cards, you can see that each learner would get a set of cards delivered. And I'm going to just send you a link in the chat just now. So the way it works is when you set it up, people would get an invite typically into their email inbox. Any of you who've tried to work with emails when delivering digital learning will realize that they don't always work. So we have the ability to copy the link and send it to people. So I'm going to send you this link in your chat, just so that you get a sense of what happens. Okay, so if you click on that link, children at work. If you open that, you should come to this screen. So this is the way that people would get an invite. And if you just launch as guest, you can see there that these are the cards that this individual would have for workstations. So that's the way all the online activities work. We can go into more depth on individual ones, and we have another webinar. So if you're interested specifically in this platform, then do get in touch. These three cards here are the key cards for workstations. And one of the reasons I like to work with this product at the beginning is that the instructions from the facilitator are simply that you have a task to solve as a group. That task will become apparent when you read the information on it. And these three cards really tell the group what it is they're doing. And as a facilitator, in the physical version, you can choose who to give these cards to, or you can issue them at random. So you have the same thing in the online version. So if I have these three cards, it tells me the group is fielding 3 tasks to do. And one of them is to decide who drives a Ford. One of them is to decide who goes to the cafe to eat lunch. So instantly I've got that leadership position. So perhaps if there was someone you know who's going to take over the group, don't give them these cards. If you've got someone who you really want to bring forward, it might be a way of getting them started. So that's the way that the online version works. The in-person version works just as I mentioned. It's a pack of cards. The digital version is an exact copy of the physical game. So what that means is that if you're in a hybrid situation, you could actually have both groups working at the same time on the same activity. Get them set up in the digital one. Those who are part of the physical group simply issue the correct cards to them. So it's a bit of a challenge, but it is possible if you're looking to work with the same activity in hybrid groups. So, so that's workstations. The next activity I think I would consider when looking at early stage working with groups is something called counterintelligence. So counterintelligence has got a nice short duration. It's about it's 15 minutes. It's actually one of the instructions is, and ideally you really want more than one group. So in the physical version, we provide a couple of sets of cards, and the idea is that you have two teams and watch them kind of develop their own way of working side by side. If you wanted to do that online, you could send the physical cards in advance. And again, we've had lots of discussions with customers who have said to us, particularly over the last 18 months, I'd really like to use your tools, but I'm working remotely with people, you know, so it needs to be online. Well, it does need to be online in terms of maybe the discussion, but it is possible to send physical materials. If you've got activities with distributed resources, it's certainly possible to send them to their home, to take photographs. Clearly lots of ways that you can do that. The in-person activities you can see in the picture down in the right involves providing some counters and some cards. So again, if you were working in a hybrid situation, some people could have images of those cards. I would suggest that the representative who was in person would have the counters. And the reason I like this activity is for a couple of things. One is, at its simplest, it's another problem-solving activity which a new team could look to develop. So here are some of the clues, for example. So you've got a bunch of counters. If you look at card 31 there, it says you're trying to create a shape. That shape is both regular and geometrical. It does require a little bit of very simple arithmetic or math that certainly you would have done in what would be the equivalent in the UK of GCSE. Is that a version you've got of it there, Rosemary?
Yeah, I just realised. I thought, I didn't know this one. I just realised we've got it. I've not opened it, but we've got it.
Okay, you can open it later. So at its simplest, it's another. It might look like another puzzle similar to workstations, but the reason I would like to use it maybe in the forming stage is towards the end of the clues, and most groups would tend to introduce the clues, even if their cards have been randomly issued in number order. So they don't come to these kind of primary information ones till later in. So if you look at 21 there, often by then they've got 4 or 5 cards laid out on the desk in front of them. 23 has a strange thing saying, if you wish to converse with your fellow team members, you must always refer to them by their first name. Even if some groups notice that, very quickly it's forgotten about. 24 says you may not look at or touch each other's clues. And quite often with groups, you'll say, oh, right, okay, so some will pull their cards back up. Others will say, well, you've already seen them, let's just leave them. What is really interesting is that in 15 minutes, even with members of the same team, you can see 2 totally different cultures develop, often without any discussion. So quite often the review for me is less about are they able to solve the task, but how they go about it. And that discussion about how culture and habits form in teams really quickly. Because often I can ask the groups to say, so who decided that you were going to ignore clue 23 but use clue 24? And often they will say things, well, you know, it just doesn't make sense to always refer people by their first name. And you get into a whole discussion around what rules do we follow, what rules do we not follow, who makes up these rules, and so on. So if you're looking at culture and how that forms within teams, then I think counterintelligence is a really simple and an easy way to do it. So I wanted just to, before I jump into any more, just to have a quick view on reviewing as well. So someone mentioned team building models that they use and mentioned the Kolb cycle. And often, again, speaking to people who are going particularly into online learning for the first time, there tends to be a focus on, again, let's do an activity for a little bit of fun, and then let's give them some content or some theory to refer to, and maybe skip these stages of the Kolb cycle, which is helping them to notice and observe what's going on. So if you've got a structured activity where the the participants are taking the lead, you're not always having to intervene, then you have a chance to sit back, notice and observe and maybe help them when you get to the review. Therefore, understanding what went on and then hopefully being able to apply that either in another activity or indeed back in the workplace. So one of the tools we added this year from the US, although it's been around for a long time, something called GG processing cards. And you can see there, I think there are probably, what are the 24 of the 50 images or something on the screen. And these are little cards that were used initially in team development program with younger people to help them formulate some responses to these review questions about what did you notice, what did you understand about, you know, why people reacted that way, and how could you use this in future. And again, I've used them already. We ran a little webinar just on using the cards. So this idea of using a second camera when you're on a Zoom call like this and sharing them is certainly a possibility. If you're in a hybrid situation, spreading the cards out and letting the people pick them as they flick through them is certainly possible and works. Or even in person, you know, if you're not wanting to exchange cards around everyone, just have them loose and people pointing to them and the facilitator can share it. You know, at its basic here, you know, it's a question there you can see in the screen. Pick one or two cards that for any reason describe your feelings, thoughts or emotions. And if you work with images, I think it's a really good way of getting people to move into thinking less about the task and more about how it was done and what it might mean for future. So I thoroughly recommend using imagery and GG cards are an interesting way to do it. Another new tool actually came from a colleague of ours in the US that we introduced this year was the Dutchman's rope. And it's not a terribly technical or sophisticated bit of kit, and I'm sure anyone who has some rope could manage it. So it came from this idea of how sailing vessels used to measure the speed. What they would do is let out a length of rope and they would have a knot tied in it every little while, and counting the knots would be able to work out the speed of the ship, which is where we get the nautical term of knots. So what we did was keep each of those 2 meters apart. So you can see the picture in the middle. If you are working with, you know, fairly strict guidelines, it's a nice visual reminder of what 2 meters actually looks like, or 6 feet if you're in the US. It also allows you through the little carabiners to kind of annotate it. Again, going back to your name cards, allow people to go back to the same place and just feel a little bit secure. And if you look at that activity, there are lots of little fun kind of opening icebreaker type activities in the Dutchman's rope. One other thing though I would suggest is that particularly in person when we're talking about review, getting people to do reviews in a physical way, I think just breaks it up instead of always asking the same question. So what happened? How did you get on? What did you feel? What we're going to do with it? So using the Dutchman's rope, for example, you've got all these knots. Rate your influence in the group's overall performance, you know, and a line of how bought into the plan were you at the start. You know, 1 is at the end, the first knot, the 10th knot is at the other end. You know, go and stand where you need to be. Charting performance of time, and think of those physical ways of doing reviews. I think is an interesting way to look at it. And unfortunately, when we're working digitally, we don't really have a lot of other opportunities. So if you're back to working with in-person groups, I would urge you to think about that. So what about when we move into areas like storming? So this might be the typical, you know, consultant is called for a development intervention. Either storming is getting a bit too much for them, or we want to move the group on a little bit faster. So in our view, we're probably thinking of activities that are probably a little bit more challenging. Maybe they can learn a little bit more about individual working styles because they're getting a bit more exposure to them. And maybe we are looking for some conflict. Again, you know, conflict certainly in terms of teams is not something to be afraid of. Arguably in many models, it's really necessary in order to have great performance. So this is where we probably go to our tried and tested activity. Colorblind's been with us for a long time in the physical version. the picture on the left there, where you have up to 30 plastic shapes, 2 of which are removed. The group is blindfolded. They have to identify the colour and the shape of the 2 missing pieces just by touch and by verbal exchange. And interestingly, this was the first activity that people contacted us about at the start of COVID and said, you know, we'd really like to do an in-person view of this. So you can see, again, this blue shape on the left-hand side is a physical piece, and you can see we use the exact same shape in the digital version. So just to show you that here back on the platform quickly, just to give you a sense. So I had set up a couple of sessions. I've just logged myself back out there. So this is the front end of the system. For those of you who haven't seen it, everyone goes to the same experientiallearningtools.com. So it's easy to whitelist from a security point of view. So when we send out colorblind, then you can see that people get the same shapes. And in our experience, if you're interested in colorblind online, we can talk about it separately. But essentially, it works out about being the same kind of difficulty length of time that people need to do this activity than they would for the physical version. And again, if you're working hybrid, there's no reason why you couldn't use both the digital and the physical version, as they both work in the same way. So, excuse me. This is another relatively new activity. I think we introduced it probably in February 2020, when the world was a very different place. Again, quite a long duration, 30 to 60 minutes worth of activity time. Now, I've said online is not possible yet. We don't have a fully online version of this, and don't have any plans in the short term. And I think it's important to point out that there will be some activities that you'll be used to using in the physical world that just don't work well in the digital world. There's something about the tactile nature of it, or the group size, and you just can't do it. And I think for me, Performance Cubed is one of them. You can see in the picture there, the bottom right, this was pre-COVID. You've got people very close together over essentially a game board. And that game board, you can see there in the middle, they have, so you've got 4 people playing in 4 different corners with different colors of cubes. And one of the reasons I would like it to use it in that kind of storming area is the way that we play it is, you can see in the picture there, people have started to make some shapes and are playing them, putting them on the board there. So in round 1, you're one of 4 teams. Your goal is to place as many of the game pieces as possible before there are no remaining locations to place any. So there are particular rules about how these cubes go down. And if you look closer, you'll see the physical cube occupies 1 cube space on the board. So it's very easy to get a kind of numerical count. And what happens is that any game piece not placed will incur penalty points. So people are starting off in a competitive position for round 1. And then we go into round 2, we take them all off and ask them essentially to do the same thing. But this team, we're asking them to increase their team performance. So you've got to reduce the amount of penalties you have by round 1 by 10%. And people will have learned about different patterns and different shapes they can create. But this time we also want the cumulative penalty. So all 4 teams, the total for all 4 teams has to be reduced by at least 15%. And it's a really interesting activity to look at how behaviors and strategies and things change when you move from a purely competitive model to something that's a bit more collaborative, and starting to look at, you know, how might we work with other teams, how might we break down silos and what's involved. And usually you find that this round 2 target actually helps both individual and all teams get a better score. So if you're interested in that type of physical activity, Performance Cubed works relatively well. So again, in team norming, what about team performance improvement? So there we could be looking at, again, maybe more challenging activities, a bit of room for building more trust amongst participants and improving performance at the same time. And maybe testing if this is a group that's been around for a long time, you know, are they actively avoiding conflict? Are they still challenging each other? How do we, you know, kind of prod them a little bit, I guess. So one of my activities, go-to activities for that type of feature would be symbols. Again, if you don't know symbols, we have both a physical version that came first and a digital version that, again, runs on the platform that was introduced in the last few months and appears to be pretty popular. So in the in-person version, on the left there, you can see some physical, and these are magnetic tiles or cards that are handed out to people. And the objective of symbols is that there are 30 tiles that are handed out to the group. If you could see that whole grid on the left there, it would have 30 spaces. So there's a task 1 process, which is, can we figure out where our tiles would be on this grid without showing them to each other? So it's a communications activity. And the reason you would know at the end when you see this final grid, the reason you would know you're correct is that if every adjacent tile had a matching symmetrical symbol. So if I can maybe hover over here, you can see the kind of third row up from the bottom in the middle there, there's a tile that's got a white cross. So it's got a matching symmetrical symbol above it. It's got the kind of bullseyes on the left. It's got the white arrow on the right. So that card would be in the correct place. And that's how the group figures this out. And it's a type of activity where there's a bit of a challenge in the first sort of 10 or 15 minutes. People wonder, can we actually do it? And then the final stage 2, in the original physical version, you only have 30 seconds to get your cards in the correct place. And what that is simulating is anytime a group has one chance to launch something, a project team, a new product team, and most groups spend a long time talking about things, you know, and maybe in that norming phase, but then don't rehearse this performance delivery bit. And that's the bit that makes or breaks the activity. Now, interestingly, when we moved into the digital world to do that, a couple of things happened. One is that this stage 2 takes longer than the standard physical version, takes longer to drag your cards in. But what it means is that it's much easier to enforce some of the rules. So there was a rule that you can only move your own tile. Often in the physical world, if the tile is wrong, someone would just move it to the correct place. In the digital world, that's not possible. And what I would suggest maybe that if you're working with the physical version, but you're back in this kind of strict kind of COVID guidelines, is maybe extend that stage 2 time so that it's similar to the digital time of 2 minutes. Maybe put a line in front of it so you only get one person approaching the board at one time, you know, maybe 2 meters away. Because what tends to happen is you have a rush of people all trying to put their cards on the grid at one time. So symbols, one of our more challenging activities. You can do it as a team version, a lot of leadership requirements in that group as well, and I think would fit well with a kind of group who's at the kind of norming phase. And of course, if you're in a hybrid, again, you could use both. And in fact, when we did our first version, we had someone with a physical board and then just had the tiles being distributed online, but we can do the full 2-stage version online now. Another activity I like a lot for this kind of group is something called reversal. In reversal, we don't have an online version, and I've said not yet because we actually do have a plan and can see how we could do this on the platform, but it's probably not going to be ready till first quarter 2022. But in the physical and in-person version, what you have on the left there is a 3-dimensional model, and that's taken outside the room so that the group, when they start the activity, doesn't see it. So the group on the left, which was a workshop we did in Saudi Arabia, if you can guess that from the attire, this was the start of the activity. And what happens is the group members are distributed with some magnetic pieces. And if you note down at the bottom of the table here, they are the kind of shapes that you would see on the faces of this cube as you rotate it around. And the group's objective is, can they build a two-dimensional plan view of this three-dimensional object that's outside? And they do that by sending out one member of the team at a time. So it's a type of activity that requires a fair amount of trust in your colleagues. Do you trust them to come back with the right information? It needs a bit of openness with team members. Not everyone will have the kind of spatial awareness that allows you to say, well, let's just divide the cube into, there's 10 of us, let's take a tenth of it each. It doesn't work like that. So it kind of forces teams to kind of challenge and push each other a little bit. And then also how they use those resources, which are the time that you spend in the model. So in person clearly exists. I haven't tried this in a hybrid version, but if anyone wants to have a go, we'd be happy to support you. I think it certainly would be possible to either send out the magnetic pieces or pictures of them and have the facilitator directed or someone on in person to use that, and certainly using a breakout room to let people one at a time view the model for up to 30 seconds, which is the time they have it, is certainly possible. So again, reversal, that's been a really popular activity in the physical world in team development, not so much in the digital world, probably for obvious reasons. So into the kind of final stage of what kind of activities around a team that's either pushing to be a high performance team or maybe already there and needs a little bit of a joke or a little bit of provocation. So what kind of tools would we suggest for building high performance teams? Again, they're likely to be challenging activities with performance targets, probably and possibly distributed leadership. High performance teams don't need someone to direct them. They tend to be self-working and therefore activities that work. The other thing I tend to find is often it's about, we call it catch the group in the act of being themselves. So this idea of illuminating what your current performance is. Those of us in the consultancy world, who are maybe asked to come in and say, look, we need our teams to be more innovative, or we need them to be breaking down more silos. And sometimes it's getting the groups to realize what's actually going on in their own behavior. So these are the kinds of tasks that I like to suggest for building high performance teams. And really it is about provoking them, and being strong about that. So the first one I'd suggest is something called Minefield. Again, a fairly lengthy duration activity. It's not online yet. It could be done with breakout rooms and physical version. And again, if you're interested in this, then please do get in touch. The in-person activity consists of, if you look on the left there, you've got a board, and it's not obvious, but that board is covered with little magnetic discs of the same color. So 16 in each of the quadrants. And what the group is asked to achieve is to map that whole grid. So they start off in one of 4 teams. They come usually to the front of the room or somewhere where not everyone would see, and they're allowed to lift a disc to obtain a piece of information. So if you look at that picture on the right, the lady there, and I believe from those hands I can tell it's Kim, who is modeling the activity for us. Kim has removed one of the green discs, and you can see it's revealed an X there. An X means that it's a mine. It's a bigger penalty than just revealing a piece of information that would show you how many mines there are. And those of you who've played Minesweeper on Microsoft might recognize where this kind of activity was developed from, that game idea. And what they do is starting off in their own quadrant, but then mapping the whole map. As you can see, Kim would be filling in that sheet with that. And what the group is asked to do is, when they have a complete map, if it's 100% correct, they get a massive bonus, and if it's not correct, they get 0. Now, we've run this for, I don't know, probably 10 years, and every group we work with starts off in the same basis. So if you go back to Performance Cube that I mentioned a little while ago, if you ask groups, you put them in 4 different corners. You tell them to maximize their score. You give them a different color. You give them a bit of security and a bit of difficulty in sharing information, then they will compete. So all groups start off by competing. However, the only way to achieve a positive score in this activity is to collaborate. So quite often I use it with groups who I'm provoking about the idea of collaboration. You know, they talk about, yes, we're very open, we collaborate, and then you observe the behaviors in something like Minefield and find they don't. So if you're in that kind of environment, Minefield works very well for that type of structure. Another one I like to use to provoke a little bit, a different way of thinking in the group is something called seeing the point. Quite a short duration activity, so useful for opening perhaps. For those of you who don't know the physical version on the right there, you can see it's a very simple, I think it's 7-piece puzzle. And what you're asking people to do in individual groups, so there's a green and a red set there, so let's, you know, in a socially distanced way, you might only have one person manipulating the pieces and maybe only a couple in a group. But what they're trying to do is to make as many arrowheads of the same size and shape. So I think you can just see on the green one on the right there that Kim's hand is on one of them and they've got two similar shapes. Now that's and in the digital version, you can see it's exactly the same shapes. And in the digital version, you can move and rotate these around the screen. So if Kim and I were both in team one, she's moving a shape, I would see it in my screen. So the technology works pretty well to try and simulate what we've done in the physical version. The real trick in seeing the point is when the facilitator goes on to stage 2, and that's saying, okay, you've made 4, and people can usually do that through a kind of sequential process. How do you make 5? And it's that kind of breakthrough thinking or looking at a problem in a different way that's really provoking the group. So when your boss says, you're getting the same budget, but I want you to do 20% more sales this year, what does that mean? Where is that going to come from? Because I've got the same resources to play with it. And that's what seeing the point is about. What's interesting when you do this with larger groups is that, and actually you can make 5. I won't reveal the secret for those of you who haven't done it, but you can use those 7 pieces to make 5 arrowheads of the same size and shape. We then often challenge the groups. So imagine you've got 4 teams in the room or 4 groups online to say, okay, can you make more than 20? Because I've got 5 in each group. And in fact, the trick is, again, bringing those together. So you're moving from organizational silos into a whole organization. And in fact, you can move from 20 to 25. And that kind of 10, 15, 20 minutes is often really useful for provoking how do we get even more performance out of this team. And then the final one I wanted to bring to your attention in terms of performing is something called Broken Square. I see a lot of interest in things like emotional intelligence, and when looking at high performance teams, you know, how do we look at not only our own performance, but everyone else's? Broken Square as an activity wasn't developed by RSVP Design. Those of us old enough to remember Pfeiffer and Jones, that's where it came from. I believe some of us probably still have some of the very thick textbooks with the Pfeiffer and Jones activity in it. So again, this is a physical activity which we sold for a long while. The photo on the left there is the final version of the digital one, which should be launched hopefully next week. And what Broken Square is about, if you don't know that activity, is again a relatively simple concept. So on this photo on the right, you can see there's 4 people, and they're issued with, you know, I think it's 5 or 6 little shapes. And their task is, and this is the important part, without speaking, you have to complete a perfect square in front of you. And you can only use the pieces in front of you. You can't take a piece from someone else. You have to wait to be given it. And the activity is only finished when there are 4 perfect squares in front of the group. And it really challenges people to think about, not only do I get what I want, but I need to ensure that the whole team gets what it needs. So you can see there, I think it's probably me several years ago when my hair was a little bit darker. And Kim have got a square in front of us, but the other 2 aren't complete. And it's amazing the amount of high-performing teams you see when you run this activity, and people sit back thinking, well, I've done my bit, you know, even though the team objective hasn't been met. And we can do the same thing online in terms of the technology. And again, you would have the capability, if that type of activity is of interest, to use both. So I talked at you quite a lot there. I've thrown a lots of kind of quick overview of activities towards you. The idea of this was to give people a sense of what we've got, where we're going. What I'm interested in is, what else are you interested in? Where do we take our development in 2022? We will be doing more online. We will be doing more physical activities. Like most of us around the world, we're probably listening to the news of where the pandemic is going and realizing we're going to have both digital and face-to-face learning probably for some time to come. So we're keen as a company to try and support you guys. But if you have any questions on either individual activities or in general, happy to open up the mics and give you a chance to fire some questions.
Graham, I've got a question. It's Nick here.
Hi, Nick.
Hello. I heard you mention earlier that you have an online platform for delivering. Am I right in thinking it's a platform for delivering workshops similar to Zoom or different to Zoom that allows all these activities to happen?
Yeah, it would work alongside whatever video conference you're using. So what happens in practice is that, well, there were a couple of problems. Let me just explain why we did it, because it might be relevant. So the first thing is that we didn't want people to have to download something, a piece of software. So what we do is send you a link and it just opens a browser window. And the second thing is, many organizations are really security conscious about what they need, so it needs to be easily whitelisted. So in practice, what would happen is we would be working much as we are just now in Zoom, and we do this to do the discussion piece. You would then get an email in your inbox. You would click on the email, and that would open, for example, your workstations cards or your colorblind cards, and we would then proceed with the activity as it is just now. So in colorblind's case, I might want to switch off the video cameras so they were only working with voice. So it could work alongside Zoom, or it could work alongside Microsoft Teams or whatever. But the idea is it automates the distribution of the assets, as we call them, in whatever experiential activity you're working with. So again, if you're interested, Nick, let us know and we can set up a session to let you experience that.
Yeah, because I'm just in the process of writing a set of 3 different workshops for clients. So now is a really good time to really understand it.
Okay. Well, Kim will follow up with you on that, and easy enough just to get you to join us on a call, and we can take you through it in a bit more detail.
Lovely, thank you. Appreciate that.
No problem.
Hey, I've got a question. This is Sharon.
Hey, Sharon.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for your demo today. So I work for a public library, and they've never done anything like this before. And I'm wondering, what do you think would be a good activity to purchase that's on the affordable side and that could really get people hooked into this idea of continuing with, bigger projects with your group? Sure.
Yeah. I'd probably suggest something like Workstations, the very first one I used. I think it's like $20 for a year's license. And okay. This idea of people working with different information. So the thing about, if everyone's got information and needs to contribute it in order to get a solution, then you immediately have got some good team working modeling going on. So that's probably a place I would start. And most people are reasonably engaged with things that are puzzles that are not too challenging. So Workstations would be my suggestion. We also have another one coming up that I'll send you some details of, Sharon, as well, that hasn't been launched yet. But that's what I'd suggest if you wanted to use something tomorrow, for example.
Okay, thanks. Appreciate it.
No problem. anything else while I have people online?
Well, it's not a question, it's more a sharing as well. So
Sure.
I'm quite familiar with the colorblind, the challenging assumptions, the symbols, the seeing the point, the workstation, because I've been working in both ways, either face-to-face or digitally online. Yeah. For your information, I work as a faculty for CCL, so they use a lot your experientials. And from my experience doing it online, it's really a challenge. It's really a challenge because of the connections. Sometimes people get the links and the connections are so slow and all that, and it creates lots of frustration. And the point here is just sharing with you. We really need to work hard for people to disconnect from the experiential or the experience they have online, but for the learning itself, you know. And sometimes it's very hard because people become so frustrated because the link doesn't work in their software or in their machines, or because they are connecting from a workstation that is located in their shops instead of an office, you know. So, and for me, it's been quite challenging to deal with the frustration of the technicality of it rather than the experiential part of it. Just a sharing with you, because I love these activities, these experientials. As I say, I'm quite familiar to use them either face-to-face or online. And if we think about doing it in a hybrid mode, it can be even more challenging. Yeah.
I absolutely agree. I think some great points there, Celeste. You know, I have to say I haven't been brave enough to try many hybrid. I think the challenge that you talk about in purely online are sufficient. But
Yeah.
but I also think as learners, we know how powerful experiential learning can be for groups, you know, when we work with them physically. So I think it's, you know, it's part of our responsibility to try and get something similar online. And often our clients, I agree, our clients don't realize how challenging this can be. And you're right, you do need good connections, but I often find it interesting when at the start of the pandemic, when there was a lot of discussion about moving all of learning online, and a lot of people say, of course we can move everything online because it's much easier. If you gave me the choice on team development, absolutely, I would want to have everyone face to face. I think you can do much more and you can do it quicker. So I think online takes longer, and it sometimes could be much more of a challenge. I think you need smaller groups as well, you know.
And I was just, it reminded me that we were seeing the point, the one with the arrows, and one of the groups were really struggling with the technical part of it, so they decided to recreate it in PowerPoint, and it was amazing because they really, so they found their way to do it, and it was brilliant because there's no only one way to do it. You just need to think about what can I do with these resources if I don't have these resources, and how can I move forward. So it was amazing to see also the creativity and the adaptability of that specific team doing that.
Yep, absolutely. Great, thank you. And feel free, if anyone's got any other insights or anything that's worked for them, you know, while we've got a bit of time, please share it. I'm not going to hold all of you back, but if anyone wants to share anything or ask any questions, please go ahead.
Just when you run into the problem of the digital breakdown and everything else, as if you can make that part of the challenge. In other words, these people are dealing with that kind of challenge every day in their workplace. And so just like your one team there, what about finding a solution to the problem that they were running into? It creates another layer of, okay, there's a lot of frustration coming up here. How do you deal with that on a daily basis? And so there is some ways to incorporate the experience that you're going through digitally and align it with what's going on for them.
I agree.
That way it doesn't drive you too crazy.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, Tim. I think the other thing is that as in always, I mean, the exercise or the activity isn't the heart of it, So, if the exercise falls apart because of the technology, that can again lead you into a whole other discussion about, as you say, what do we do when this happens in real life? So you can still, use that experience. People are going to have an experience no matter what. It might be a good experience, it might be a bad experience, but they're going to have an experience while we're here. So, if you can facilitate and use that to drive yourself towards a learning, why not? Yeah.
This is Jeff, and I'm in Atlanta, and I agree, Tim. I was actually typing the same thing. What I really try to do is make that a learning laboratory where this is reality.
Yeah.
We have to deal with whatever comes up and still have to get done what we have to get done. So it's not up to me as the facilitator consultant to figure out your technology issues. You have to figure out how to do it. And especially in terms of, I don't use the word hybrid, I use blended.
Mm-hmm.
For
Yep.
my programs that are 4 people in person and 7 people not. And it's like, you're smart people, you figure out what works best for you and let me know.
Yeah, great point, Jeff. And how is that working for you? What challenges are you having in the blended situation compared to either 100% online or 100% in person?
Well, one example would be working with an MBA school where we had the majority of people in person and we're doing an activity. And one solution they came up with is your virtual participants still need to be engaged. You determine what that means, but it's not just up to the virtual person to be asked. It's up to them to insert themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And so literally for doing, for example, a physical activity where everyone has to touch something, literally someone had a laptop and that person's face was on the screen via Zoom, and they moved the laptop with their picture to touch things, and they were involved in that way. So again, I didn't come up with that solution, they did.
Uh-huh.
So for me, as a consultant, the notion is you have to figure out how to do things. Your context and each other. I'm just here to provide the opportunity for you to do that.
Yep. Great. Thank you. Any other thoughts or questions?
Yeah, one of the things that just watching this came up for me is, I've got been doing this for 30 some years. So, when you're asking about different models, oh my God, all the different models that people come up with and want to use and everything else. It's always interesting. But I think one of the, one of the ways to look at it, number one, is technology as being part of the problem, as you were saying, as Jeff was saying, but also how many of our activities, I remember blind triangle, where one part of the group would be removed to a different room or a different space, and they would have to help the other team solve the problem. How many of those activities that we've used in the past could be hybrid activities in which the folks who are online are the ones that have the solutions, and the people in the room are the ones that have the problem. So just a way to go about thinking about it. Again, using the technology as a tool as opposed to something that's getting in your way.
Yeah, it's a good point, Tim. We have a client in Japan who did that. One of the products we provide called Learning Squared has got both the broken square activity that I just showed you, but another one called Hollow Square, which is also a kind of Pfeiffer and Jones activity, and it's really about how groups would create kind of instructions for someone else to follow a process. And in the physical world, you artificially create that. So you put the people in another room, and then you get the one people to write instructions. And he had a hybrid group, and he said, well, why don't I just have the people who are remotely do the instructions and then see if the people in the room can follow? And it turns out to be a better activity than trying to do it in real life. So absolutely, I'm sure there are lots of activities out there that would probably be better designed for the kind of hybrid or blended situation that we have now. Yeah,
that's also the reality of many organizations.
Yeah.
That the folks who are doing the work are a long ways from the people who are trying to create the solutions.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Good. Okay, well, just after 5 p.m. my time, so just over an hour. I think that's probably enough for most of us. Happy to stay on if people have got either things they want to chat about specifically or more questions. But if not, I'd like to thank you for your attention. It's always great to have a group with us, for a bigger group with us, as well as being able to provide the recording to those who didn't join. So please get in touch if you have any questions, and if we don't hear from you, those of you looking forward to the Christmas and New Year period, here's hoping 2022 turns out to be an improvement. Thanks very much.
You're going to be emailing that recording, yes?
I will be emailing a recording and a copy of the slides and some of the links that might be useful to people.